microphones?
Yeah, because we're going to record it. So
Oh, okay.
that's how we get the sound. I know, it
All
feels
right.
weird. It
It's
feels
the
weird.
way it is. That's fine. All right.
I know.
Thank you for moving up.
You want us to move up more?
You could actually come sit right
I'm
next
going
to
to make
us.
this into a group setting, right? You got to meet Alexis last time. I can introduce myself. Clinical social worker, one of the co-owners of Traverse Counseling and Consulting. Just have a great passion for families. I believe that families are the fabric of our society and that we are not doing enough to help support families deal with tackling hard or challenging issues, and we have to keep doing more, and that's part of what we're about, is working with families. So if we have a kiddo coming in that's struggling, we want to make sure parents know what we're doing and that they're aligning with us so we can help with whatever the interventions are. Because if a parent knows what to do at home, we can help children overcome the obstacles they're facing and without it causing harm to any relationships. So that's part of what we're about. I share with you guys a little bit. I have 2 sons. My wife and I are blessed. One is in college and one is a senior, and I can attest that there is an anxiety that he has, and we're routinely trying to help him figure out, how do you want to manage this, and how can I help you figure this out? And you have lots of choices, and that sometimes doesn't help because that makes him more overwhelmed, right? So it's like, how do you funnel him in to get him to the decision points? I think we live in a fascinating times, and I have to say that I think there's just this huge undercurrent of anxiousness that people have. There's anxiousness about our country with this election. I think there's an anxiousness about our world with lots of things happening, and it's just anxious times would be the sort of the undercurrent that I think is present. And so we certainly pick it up with families, and whatever we can do to help people walk into some of this stuff is important. So we're here today to give you what we can about applying some practical approaches to managing polarization that may show up for families. And so we wanted to jump into that a little bit. You got the clicker? Oh.
It worked.
So hey, you guys, welcome.
Not everybody thought it started at Big Bad 6:30.
Yeah, it's okay.
We're
You
glad
made
you're
it.
here.
Polarization class?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. You're just in time. Come on in. We're just getting started.
So don't be shy with questions, you guys. I think the rule is wherever there's curiosity, there's learning. And if you're curious, ask a question. So it helped me get a A in biology when I went to St. John's and I had a class at 8 o'clock at St. Ben's on, I think it was like Friday morning, and it was brutal. I had to get up early to get on the bus, and I sat in the front row, and I asked lots of questions, and I got an A, and it helped me to stay awake. So I've learned the value of questioning. For us, the question for you is, if you think about, we have this holiday Thanksgiving coming up, what's your vision that you have for a perfect Thanksgiving? And I want you to think about that, because for lots of families, they get anxious or worried about if we're going to have a gathering of family members around Thanksgiving. There's this worry about how are we going to talk about politics or what's going on, that it can be a hard or difficult topic to discuss. So I was just curious. Go ahead.
My husband has already said, let's go out of town. And he was joking, but there's some truth in there,
Yes.
like an avoidance
Yes.
of drama, of difficult topics. All of the above.
Yeah, there's that anxiousness about the holiday that if we come together, it could be difficult or stressful. Yeah, when it should be a time of trying to bring everybody together for that Thanksgiving holiday, or that's sort of the social pressure, right? That we're all supposed to come together and it's supposed to be a happy, joyful time. It doesn't always happen. Thanksgivings can be hard. Other thoughts about Thanksgiving holiday coming up? Thoughts and feelings people have?
My vision is that I'm not cooking.
Good for you.
That's so good.
Change it up.
Thanksgiving is hard.
Yeah.
Yes. Another way of thinking about it is if we looked at everybody's family tree and you were to shake that family tree, you're going to have people that see things differently, and some can be really out on some polarized views. So if we shake everybody's family tree, you're going to see some differences in how people see things. And so the question becomes, what do we do about this? How can we manage this? And so it's hard because we live in a time where there can be really incendiary things that people are saying. There can be ways that people can start conversations that can quickly escalate it. So I have a family member who I'm not going to mention who we would start a conversation about politics, and his line would be, Michael, why do you hate America? Okay, so he was teasing me, but it's like there's a baiting in some ways that can happen with some of these types of tensions or conflicts. And so I think for today, we want to help you see some of the profiles around this, how to walk into these conversations, how to manage them, how to do your best to try to prepare and set the stage so that you can have a Thanksgiving meal or other family gathering where it doesn't create such stress or difficulty. Can we prevent all of it? No, but if we are proactive, I believe we can take steps to try to make things go a little bit better. Okay? So, encourage you to stay curious, ask lots of questions today. We're happy to share what we can with you. Where are we?
I got it.
Oh,
Whoop.
whoops, I'm going too fast.
There we go.
So, to ground us, I like this bit of scripture here. It says, God has told us to press towards peace. Okay, so and it's hard because, when families come together, not everyone may be a believer, but at least for me, when I come together, this is a helpful thing to be able to just say, hey, with Romans 12, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now that's a pretty tall order, but I appreciate it. And then Corinthians 3:12-15, put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and, if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called in one body, and be thankful. So I thought, I like this because this is, in a way, this scripture sort of challenges me. It's like, all right, if I know my family is going to get together at Thanksgiving, and this is what I'm being called to do, I wonder if there are ways that I could try to help create this so that we find a way to be in this together as a family and be able to see each other's differences and not allow it to tear us apart or create distance between us. I think for me, that's perhaps one of the greatest things that I'm seeing is for families, there's the avoidance, right? I don't want to have conflict, so I'm not going to share much. So we end up staying in the shallow end of the pool in our relationships. We're not going to the deeper end to talk about our thoughts and feelings. And to me, that's a tragedy. We're losing the connectivity that we need to have as a family to be able to share our views and to know that we do love and care about each other and we can stay connected even though we have these differences. That we're not going to allow the nation and some of the stuff that's out there prevent us from staying in connection with each other. It's not an easy thing. And I can tell you, I've got family relationships that have been extremely difficult, so I come humble to you. There are relationships I have that I have tried, and they've tried with me, and it has been really hard. Okay? And so there can be relationships and families that can stay stuck for periods of time, and there's thoughts about how we can help find ways to invite them back into relationship.
Got it.
All right, so we talked about this, or my prior colleague, or
Yes.
Matt was here, and we talked about there's a moral foundation theory, and this is helpful. Jonathan Haidt put this together with Righteous Minds was his book. He did some nice research because he looked at liberal and conservative sort of perspectives on things, and he said, hey, these are kind of the core values that can be different between people, and differences in preference. Because most people have all of these 5 values here. Care. I want to show that we care about each other, that there's a fairness for everybody. We're going to be a loyalty to each other. Authority, that we're going to respect leadership, and sanctity, the value of things that we believe are sacred. Okay? And where it gets tricky is that we can have different preferences. So I have a quick example. Do you guys remember, I'm sure you remember, the unrest with George Floyd, tragic loss of a man. And then we saw posters, lawn signs that said Black Lives Matter, okay? And then there was the emergence of other people that had signs on their yard that said all lives matter. I don't know if anybody saw that, but there's a differences in how they were preferencing things, and some to a great offense. Okay, so folks that had Black Lives Matter saying, hey, wait a minute, this is about fairness. There is an unfairness, an unjust thing happening here. But for all lives matter, folks, if you were to talk to them, they're saying, hey, I believe in fairness, but the sanctity of all life is where my value set as the priority, and that's why I wanted that sign up there. So those are just one way of thinking about how these sorts of value differences can show up and emerge. And where it gets difficult is if we don't have a way to talk to our neighbors about some of these things, it can create lots of difficulty and divide.
And I kind of showed this picture last time, but as we recapped it, I wanted to show it again, just really as there's some new faces to me, and just, this is kind of a demonstration of like the moral taste buds of like a tongue. And I also wanted to share a few examples that I see in culture where or in politics, where there is kind of a differing order of these moral taste buds. We see care, harm, and sanctity and degradation come into conflict around abortion. And for liberals, there's a care for women's health and wellness. And for conservatives, there's a sanctity of life that's upheld. Or even with gender rights, we see the care, harm of the individual versus the sanctity and purity of gender. And so these are just some ways that we see a difference in kind of ordering these moral taste buds. And when we examine these political views in light of moral taste buds, we can see the different order, right? That liberal or conservative places its moral leanings. Differences in moral leanings lead to different views. And I was also thinking about how our identity can kind of get tied to our moral leanings. And often our beliefs become kind of intertwined with our identity. And sometimes when we're confronted with someone who has an opposed view to us, it feels like threatening to my humanity that this person believes this different thing. And so I find myself when I'm going to defense mode, I wonder, I try to be curious about that because it's bringing something up in me. And then, I think of this book that I read has anyone ever heard of James Fowler? He wrote a book called Stages of Faith. And in that book, he talks about the quilt of faith. And he says that, all throughout our lives, we are confronted with this kind of different beliefs and information, and we look at it, and we're like, oh, this doesn't fit, or or it does, and we add it to our quilt. And kind of as we progress in our as in our teens to mid-20s, we really start to look at our quilt, and we start to move chunks out, and it causes a lot of distress for people. And so I think this applies to the political arena because we're being faced with these different pieces of quilts that people have, and it feels like if I'm looking at my quilt and it's like, well, if this piece out, the whole thing will fall apart, is basically what it feels like. Instead of I'm just being presented with another piece, another idea, and it may or may not. I may have to seam rip a piece of my quilt out, or I may not. But just kind of, I think it's a nice way to think about, okay, this is starting to tap into my quilt here. I maybe feel like pieces are being ripped out, or some of the different thread is coming loose, and I might need to look at that piece and see if it still fits, or add a couple extra stitches in. I don't know if we have any seamstresses in here, but anyway, I myself am a seamstress, so. And then we kind of had this slide last time, but I wanted to just talk about, Michael's already talked about anxiety, but it fuels conflict. When there is an anxiousness in the air, whether it's in ourselves or in others, it can fuel the conflict. It adds gasoline to the fire. And And as we start to wade into how do we talk to people, right? How do we engage in conversations around politics or with really different views? I think it's important to hold that there may be anxiety, whether that arises, whether it's in yourself or someone else, and just knowing that it may come up. And we also later will talk about how do we help like settle anxiety a little bit too.
I would just add that if I can lower somebody's anxiety, they're more able to have a conversation with me. And that's the part that we need to help set up on the front end when we're trying to come together to talk about stuff. And we'll walk into that, about that. So what do you do to prepare if you're going to try to have a conversation with someone or part of your family? I like, these are just, again, some scriptural kind of foundations that say, hey, if you're going to talk to a brother or sister about something that's on your heart, what do you need to do to kind of prepare to do that? And so I've got a few scripture points here from Galatians 6, chapter 1, to be meek. You know, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live in the Spirit should restore that person gently. I thought, what a nice reminder that it's not about coming in hard to confront. How can I walk into this gently? To be humble, you know, from James chapter 4, verse 10, humble yourself before the Lord, and he will lift you up. And to forgive. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ forgave you. And patience. My dear brothers and sisters, this is from James chapter 1, verse 19 through 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. I thought, these are some powerful things. Now, the other kind of cool thing is, I think those early Christians are not too different from us, right? I think they were scrapping. I think they were having all sorts of disagreements, trying to figure it out, and thank goodness there was some wise folks that said, hey, Paul and James, don't forget these things. Here's a reminder for you. I like these because if you want to talk to children about this, or more teens, I've just said, hey, here's a faith-based foundation for you. If you want to learn, this Bible has some really cool things in it that could really help you to know what is it calling us to do if we're having difficulties with a brother or sister. Okay? I like these, so I just wanted to share that with you. Just some examples of ways to ground us as we're starting to enter into dialogue or trying to set the stage for a discussion with someone that could make it a hard conversation. If I can remember these 4 things, boy, does that put me at ease. I'm called to be this way as I'm present to talk to folks. So when we start talking about relationships and we're starting to talk with people, there's this notion called triangulation, okay? Now, what I would want you to know about it, there's this theory that relationships are most stable in forms of 3, not 2. So it happens a lot. It's normal. If Alexis and I have a problem, we can talk to somebody else who could help us. We bring mediators in. There's therapists that sometimes get brought in to help if a couple's having stress. There's also ways that people can bring in a third party to create alliances that can exacerbate or make the problems more difficult. Okay? So if I have an issue with someone, I can team up with Alexis, and she's on my side, and I feel safe now to go against or confront somebody else. So it's something we just want you to be aware of, that if you see triangulation, it's typically a symptom that people aren't feeling safe or secure to be able to talk about it. I need somebody to come with me to be able to have this conversation. You see it with kids when they like somebody. Hey, will you go send this note to somebody else to let them know, see if they like me? Right? The messenger. It's a type of triangulation. And it's not all bad. It can be helpful, but it's something we have to be careful with. Because if Alexis takes on my issue and confronts someone, then that person that she just confronted feels like they've been harmed. And now she becomes the villain. And it creates an escalation of conflict or difficulty. So just something for you guys to be thoughtful of, or as you see families in relationship, if you can step back and see it, it's all over the place. Most families have it. A little bit more scripture. I think as we start to walk into talking to people about something, bringing something up, a conflict, I think we have to take a look at our part in the conflict. How have I contributed to this? And so you guys maybe have heard this one, Matt, I'm sure you have. Matthew 7, verse 3 through 5. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eyes? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eyes. I think this call here in Matthew's gospel, I think is some of the harder work, because I can feel defensive. I can be aware of my own inadequacies that can play out if I'm trying to talk to someone about whatever's on my heart, whatever issue I need to take a look at. It's just a reminder that if we can take a look at our own selves and be aware of how we may be contributing, then we can be a better management of it, have a better way of approaching things if I know what's going on inside of me. Preparing. So this is where we try to get into the practical side of things here. This is, if you're going to have courageous conversations, you're trying to think about, first off, if I walk into this conversation, what are the possible reactions that I can get or I could receive or I've already received historically? I've got a family member that I can predict that if I walk in a certain way and I try to bring something up, I have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen or how they're going to react. Okay, so if I know that, then I can't change another person's way they're responding, but I sure can change mine. So if I can step in and walk with a different approach, I may create a different outcome. So if I can predict what may happen, I can have the power, latitude to possibly change the outcome by looking at myself. The goal that I think I'd have you think about is, what can I do to decrease defensiveness? And so that's an important skill. You're trying to prevent defensiveness from somebody else happening. Because I don't know about you, if I'm defensive, I'm not going to stop protecting myself until I feel safe. And if somebody else is defensive, their goal is to protect themselves. And I would argue that if you find yourself in an argument with someone and they're getting defensive, your best bet is to try to stop the conversation and even say, hey, I apologize, I think I might have said something that's led you to be defensive. Can we back up and start over, right? Can I do a redo? Can I reset this? And if I can't reduce or remove defensiveness, then it is okay to say, I'm wondering if we could stop because I'm worried this is starting to go in a direction that's not healthy for us. You're too important to me to allow this to get into a place that could be hurtful or harmful. Don't forget prayer. Every time I walk into a hard conversation, I got to tell you, I've got to say a prayer. Dear Lord, help me as I walk into this. Help me to be humble. The serenity prayer sometimes helps, if you guys know that one. God grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Sometimes I got to say that 3 or 4 times. So there are ways that prayer can be helpful. And I would argue that this is a powerful way to introduce children into prayer. How does that help you when you're facing something that's difficult? So I encourage you to think about that. And also be aware that you have your own kind of conflict style or preference. Most of us are not real fond of conflict. In Minnesota, we have Minnesota Nice, and the rule is if you don't have anything nice to say, you
Don't say it at all.
Yes, okay? So that's, sometimes is not always helpful. There are times that we do need to bring things up and talk about it with each other.
These are kind of profiles that are from Braver Angels. We talked about them just kind of in general during the discussion last week. But Braver Angels is an organization that seeks to bridge the divide between kind of red and blues in America in politics. And so they kind of came up with these 6 profiles. And specifically for families, if you guys are interested in doing more of a deeper dive on these, they do have a training on their website that I think is really helpful. And it just goes deeper and actually helps you with, like, how do I respond to someone that fits this role? So there's the gladiator, the defender, the sniper, the peacekeeper, the bystander, and the engager. And I'll go a little bit more in depth with each one as we go along. But the engager is the role that we want to be in the attempt to have respectful conversations across differences. So we'll kind of start off with the gladiator. So the gladiator initiates battles against others with wrong views. They're kind of at the front of the battle line, and they're really trying to make sure the wrong-headed relatives get it right. This could sound like, I'm going to straighten you out on gun violence and legislation. This role seeks out conversations to shift others into their viewpoint. They want other people to see. They want them to think the way that they do. There's often an urgency in their tone and body language. And the gladiator can make others feel inferior or small. This role can stem from a place of I'm right and you're wrong, or they themselves feel inadequate or small. And when humans feel small, we tend to just try to get bigger and louder to protect ourselves. And this dynamic can create power struggles and heated conflict, which can in turn cause disconnection and hostility in relationships. And I myself have been in this role. I've actually played a part in each one of these roles. Different people bring different things out of me, I think. And so I also just want, before moving forward, to say that self-awareness is really important, as we've talked about, and we can really only change ourselves and how we show up. And when we notice we're falling into these roles, we can just find ways to step out of it.
The gladiator sometimes can feel coercive, trying to force you to change your view, and typically elicits heavy defensiveness right out of the gate. They'll come in strong and hard, or they can be slow and gradual into their position, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a defensive posture. Again, I don't know about you, I'm going to take care of myself and protect myself. So either I'm going to escalate and engage, or it might say, I don't think I feel comfortable walking into this conversation. The second one is probably the latter's a better approach with someone that's in that kind of gladiator role.
Mm-hmm. The defender. So the defender will counteract when others go first. So often misrepresenting their position. The defender may kind of make more blanket, generalized statements and kind of more pointed comments to defend their position. And this could sound like, so you want to open the borders to everyone, or you want to shut down the borders and keep the country for people who look like you. So very broad, general statements. The defender role can come from a place of desire to support someone or a perspective that's getting attacked seemingly unfairly. However, they can quickly escalate arguments. The defender doesn't necessarily start the conversation, but they are set on making their voice heard and known regardless of the relational conflict that may come from their comments. And this role can also cause negative sentiment and disconnection in relationships.
If you remember the role of triangulation, so if you've got people with strong positions like these two roles, they may easily look for other people to align with them to make a point. Alexis and I are on the same page that you see it wrong. And that, again, doesn't go well. People feel ganged up on and get defensive, and then that's where you start to see people starting to check out or withdraw and disengage. And then we have disconnection. right? That's the fabric of family systems that begin to tear, fray, or weaken. And that's the piece we really worry about.
And then we've got the sniper. They get their digs in, usually kind of within a group context to get a rise, and then they often kind of back away, as you can see this monkey kind of like shoving, or the chimp shoving the other one in the water and kind of walking away. A sniper might say something like, so what does your family socialist and Trump lover think about that one? The sniper takes a shot in the dark out of nowhere with their words. In relationships, this can create tiny fractures over time that erode trust and connection. And after having a conversation with a sniper, one can feel blindsided, confused, and singled out. Or what I call the Gatorade effect. So I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with someone and you just feel like, I picture it as I feel like someone dumped an entire tub of Gatorade on me like they do after a football game, but they didn't quite stir it in all the way, so I'm just kind of sticky and wet, but I wasn't expecting to be. And so that's kind of what I see that as.
How many of you have experienced one of these roles in conversations you've had with family or friends? Okay. I think it's hard. I think I think people enter in with these roles out of anxiousness or fear, perhaps. I got to come in guarded, and I got to come in like I almost have to fight. And so that's some of what we're trying to also help. Can we reduce that so that as a family, if we're coming together for Thanksgiving, can we create a different sort of expectation so that people don't feel like they need to do this? So I'd even say, if you want, doing a Braver Angels education for everybody in your family could be really novel, because you could say, hey, here's the things that we know really make things more difficult. And if we could all prevent or stop doing these, could we create a different experience if we came together?
And then the peacekeeper. This is also one I know very well. The peacekeeper tries to prevent or cut off all political conversations, including one-to-one discussions. So the peacekeeper's motto is, let's avoid politics and religion, or whatever it is, at all costs. When other people are having a political discussion, the peacekeeper inserts themselves by shutting down the conversation, or they're like, ooh, let's not talk about that at Thanksgiving, we're having fun. And this role really can hinder connection between different perspectives. It shuts down opportunities to learn one another's perspective and experience the connection of being heard by another.
I can relate to that. I'm sure everybody here knows a peacekeeper of some sort in their family, or themselves have played that role. Not uncommon.
Or the bystander. I don't know why I like this little GIF up here. I kind of joke to Michael and Matt, who was here last week, that I'm a recovering peacekeeper and a bystander, because those are the roles that I fall into just naturally and so quickly, and I often find myself in those roles. The bystander, they keep their mouth shut and their head down. This role can seem harmless at first glance. After all, this role doesn't really antagonize or stir the pot. The bystander falls into the trap that if they don't talk about it at all or say anything, then it isn't a problem. Or for me, it was for a long time. Well, if I don't actually read about it or know anything, then it's not really a big deal, or it's not really a problem, and I don't really have much to add because I don't know anything, so then I can just stay out of it. I think of this role as someone who sees a big elephant in the room but doesn't say anything, even though it's taking up more than half the room. The problem lies in the disengaged stance. Part of a relationship is engaging in conversation, sharing viewpoints, listening well, and being heard and known by the other. By presenting as disengaged, this role can hinder perspectives and ideas being shared that lead to connection. Michael kind of talked about this earlier, but I kind of made a note of, for some of these roles, there's a worry or a fear underneath. Just like, anger, anxiety, those are kind of more secondary emotions, and there's often a whole host of other things underneath it. And so we find when people find themselves into some of these roles, there's just often something underneath. And I kind of thought of an example as, sometimes I'll be talking with some people in my life about politics, and I'll feel really attacked, like my intelligence feels attacked. And I know that when my intelligence is being called into question, I am very likely to shift into a sniper role. That is just me. I will get a quick jab in, and then I'm gonna duck out of there, because it's safer for me to jab and leave than it is for me to sit and you know what? I didn't actually read that article all the way, or I actually don't really know what I really think about that. I was just, it helped. I'm able to kind of stay disengaged in that way too, but I get a jab in and then I leave. So that's just me. Those are some of the ways I fall into those roles.
I think I grew up in a big family. I've got 5 siblings, and we're kind of all over the political spectrum. And I have to say, there have been times that I think I've probably done each of these roles, and I think my family members have all played different roles in this capacity as well. So it fluctuates. I might take this role this time or next time, or my siblings are, oh, Michael, you're doing that again. Okay, right? So they tease me, or we can tease each other, and those are the good times. And there's been times, too, where it's created anger or frustration. Really hate when you do that. Things like that can happen.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to reiterate, too, something I say to my clients often is, we get stuck and we fall into these patterns. And the goal isn't to get rid of the patterns, actually. Sometimes we might never be able to get rid of something. It's really about having the awareness of when it shows up and finding ways to step out of it. And that's the mastery, right? I may never not fall into, I may always find myself falling into the bystander or the peacekeeper, but the key is when I find myself in that role, do I have tools and ways to step out of it?
Good.
And then the engager. This is what we want to be. I think most people want to engage. They want to sit with people in conversation and have connection. The engager attempts to have respectful conversations across differences. So practically, what does this look like? Whether the engager is interacting with a gladiator or a peacekeeper, they offer presence, listen well, clarify, acknowledge the other's perspective, and allow space for sharing multiple perspectives. If I could use one word to describe the role of an engager, I would use the word curious. The engager uses curiosity as a launch pad from which they seek to understand, attune, and be open to their perspective of the other. Curiosity does not have an endpoint in mind. It stays present in the moment, seeking to aim at the things that we don't understand. And curiosity across divides allows us to see beyond our perspective and humanizes the other person.
I think, just to add on that, one of the things that if we could help people flip out of defensiveness and transition into curiosity, that's a really powerful flip. So instead of having to defend myself, can I ask questions and tell me more why you think that way, or how did you come to believe that? I don't have to defend myself. I can be curious, and which kind of rolls into the next slide. The work really is preparing ourselves to listen. One of the greatest gifts of humanity or dignity is to let someone know that they are heard and understood. And it's really something when you can engage in a conversation and someone feels heard and understood, how they lower their guard a bit. Because we're sharing a bit of dignity to them. I want to know about you and how you came to those perspectives and beliefs. Now the hope is that it can be reciprocated, a reciprocity, right? If I'm going to listen to you, will you listen to me? Sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't. And so you have to be ready, because if somebody's not ready to hear your view, you could say, I'd love to share my thoughts with you because I see it a little bit different. Are you okay if I shared those with you? And they may not be, or they get defensive again. It's like, no, tell me more. It sounds like you want to share more about how you see things. I want to learn about that because I care, right? It's an act of caring to hear somebody's view and perspective.
And there's a book that we referenced last time by a woman named Monica Guzman. It's called I Never Thought of It That Way. And so she calls this the antidote. And she says perspective, friction, and curiosity. She says these things are the antidote to division and disconnection. That perspective, my sphere of, just knowing that my sphere is a very hard word to say. Sphere of knowledge and perspective is limited. I only know so much. There's a lot of information out there that I don't have no idea. And so friction is rubbing elbows with people with different perspectives. She calls it having a I never thought of it that way moment. And then radical curiosity, the search for what is missing in your knowledge, collecting knowledge from a broad base and rejecting easy answers and embracing complexity. And so if we're able to, get that perspective of there's probably a lot more about this topic that I don't know. And just acknowledging that. And then friction, I'm actually going to maybe look into some of what this person next to me is thinking, or how they came to their ideas. And then curiosity, I like those questions of how did you come to believe what you believe? What brought you to that? Perhaps what are the values that you have that are kind of underneath?
I think with curiosity, it leads you to see where there may be common ground. And for many of us, if we really we were able to back up, that most of us want a real similar sort of thing. I want to be able to feel a sense of safety and security in my life. I'd like to have some freedoms in my life that I believe that we have in this country. Those are commonalities. I'd like to be able to have the opportunity to take a path to see if I can succeed in life. So I want opportunities, right? These are all kind of common threads. So sometimes that can help us to see there's more that we have in common than we have differences.
And this is just more from Guzman. I kind of touched on this a little bit, but she has a formula for radical curiosity. And it's mind the gap, collect knowledge, reject easy answers, and embrace complexity. And I don't know about you, but I love things I can pull out of my back pocket, very kind of formula, quick things. I can be okay, I'm going to try to mind the gap. I'm going to try to say, you know what? I'm going to get perspective. There's probably so much that I don't know about this thing. Let me be curious about it. Let me ask questions. Let me embrace complexity and realize that, they just have a really different opinion than me. And I'm okay. My identity is intact. I am okay if they think differently than me. And this is another tool that she has. If anyone is interested, the book is called I Never Thought of It That Way. And I would really recommend it. It really kind of was really insightful for me as I read it. But she has a tool called the conversation dial. And so she talks about you got to adjust these things and make sure they're just right for a deeper conversation around something where there's such a difference. She talks about having the time. Is there enough time to devote to this conversation? Attention. Are there kids running around that you kind of have to watch? Or are you guys kind of sitting down at a table? Or do you guys have each other's full attention to listen well? And then parity. That's about balancing power dynamics. These conversations, they should have a sense of equality to them. If one person is dominating the conversation, it can lead to frustration or disengagement, kind of stepping into that kind of bystander or walking away. And both sides should feel that they have an equal voice. And then containment. Is there an ability for these conversations to have containment around them so they don't spiral out of control when the emotions are rising? And then it also talks about, keeping emotions in check and preventing the discussion from being hostile or personal. When you notice that defensiveness showing up, that might be a kind of point for you to go, okay, am I able to kind of manage this defensiveness. If I'm not, it may be time to pause the conversation, right? I'm starting to dip into this area where I'm gonna be a sniper. I'm gonna kind of defend myself. I'm not able to manage it. And then embodiment is the last one, and that's just really nonverbal cues. They matter, right? Are we listening to someone and just saying, "Oh yeah, I totally agree with you," but making like this kind of face, right? So our body language matters, and the way that we're presenting physically, people are picking up on that. And so just, really with the conversation dial, it's kind of when you're presented with an opportunity to have a political conversation or a conversation with a lot of heat to it, I recommend kind of thinking about the dial. Okay, is this tuned to the right frequency of okay, I got the green light. All of these are kind of in line. We got enough time. There's enough tension to it. There's kind of equal, there's the equal power dynamics in it, right? And so managing and making sure all those are tuned to the right frequency.
So, you know me, you probably are getting a sense of me. I enjoy how we can integrate Scripture into this stuff because there's so much powerful force here that if we could help people just see it, there's always Matthew's chapter 18, 15 through 17. How do we address concerns with someone? Now, this is interesting. Remember I talked about triangulation, how you can bring a third party in? That's exactly what he's talking about here. He's saying, hey, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along. Triangulation, right? So that every matter may be established by the testimony of the 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So, to me, it's sort of the combination of how do I show care, concern, compassion, and how do I bring something up to someone I care about. And I go to the person first, and if that's not working, can I bring somebody with me to address the sin or the hurt that's happened? And then how do I bring more people together to bring it up? Remember, if you go back to the work that we talked about before, I have to also do the heart work ahead of time. Because if I'm coming in an aggressive way or a less than gentle way, it's not going to go well. I used to do a lot of drug and alcohol interventions. I've done a couple hundred of them. The old school thought is I got to come in hard and I have to confront to get somebody to realize that they're stuck. And it doesn't work. It takes away somebody's dignity. It's through care and concern and kindness that we can help people see the possibility of a different way of living and operating. So we can bring issues up to someone, and that's a very courageous thing to do, but if we can do it with a gentleness, it can make a difference. I call this next one the art of the invitation. So if we're going to bring people together to talk about something, it's for us, if we're going to initiate it, it's to think about how can I let them know what the issue is, what I would like to have happen, and finding a time when we can sit together. It's a goodwill negotiation, and I'm not going to surprise someone. So if I remember when I was a kid, my mom would say, Michael, come over here, I need to talk to you right now. And I'm going, oh crap, what did I do? Okay? So it creates an immediate defensiveness and anxiety. Probably warranted a few of those times. I did get a little bit of trouble. But there are times where if she would have just said, hey, I need to talk to you about this. I got this note from school. I want to talk to you about what happened. Okay. I know now what it is. I can lower my anxiety and I can work with them. So if you can let people know what you want to talk about, what you'd like to see happen, and see if they can agree to join you in the conversation. Now, the invitation can be on a grander scale if you want. The invitation could be a different sort of approach if you want to think about Thanksgiving coming up. There can be ways you can invite family members. I'll talk about this later. Can I invite family members to come together in a different way, to create a different way of being able to be together to talk about different views and perspectives? we can do that. We can invite people into that. For our standpoint, we really look at family leadership as three basic functions. I believe it's the adults, it's our job to make sure people are safe. It's easy when they're kids, but when they're 16 and a driver's license, they're driving, it's a different challenge to discern what is safe and not safe. We still have to do it, it's important. We have to nurture our children, and I believe we need to nurture the relationships between each other as a family. It's easy when they're 2 and they fall down and skin their knee, you come give them a kiss and a hug and they can be okay with the Band-Aid on and go on. But nurturing relationships throughout the life of a family is important, that we take time and attention with each other. The third function that we believe is critical for families is to challenge each other in ways that can help us to grow and overcome things. So rather than allowing a kiddo stay stuck in their anxiety and trying to prevent them from having anxious experiences, how can I challenge them to try to overcome this anxiety? I want you to try some things so that you can help learn how to manage this anxiety so it doesn't overcome you. So different type of approach. So 3 functions, okay? And I don't think we're going to be done with these functions, in my opinion, until we leave the earth, okay? I think about my dad, I think about my grandparents. There are things that they did to challenge us growing up in adulthood that I appreciated. That was nice. You know, there's problems I've had with siblings, and it was my parents that said, I really would like you guys to go take some time to figure this out. That was a challenge to us to try to resolve this.
And so, you know, as we think about kind of safety, Michael and I, and Matt also, our coworker, we do a lot of work with families, right, and high conflict families. And so we have these ground rules that we often kind of lay out with families. And that's, number one, every human being has dignity, right? That's just a ground rule, bare minimum, no matter how much conflict is in the family. We really want to establish that as a rule. Every person in the room has dignity. Respecting the perspective of the other. And we really emphasize this does not mean that we agree, right? And so I'm able to have my perspective and Michael's able to have his. And we may not always align or agree on those things. And we're both okay, right? And so it's having that as part of the ground rule. And then no blaming. We're not going to start blaming each other and saying it's your fault that my feelings are hurt because I said, I don't know, X, Y, Z. The examples are just not coming to me today. But, and then time out, pause. You can take a time out or pause at any time in the conversation. I feel the defensiveness rising in me, and I'm not able to manage. Well, that's time for me to say, you know what, guys, I need a time out. This is starting to bring some things up in me, and I'm not able to bring my best self to this situation or this conversation. And then a slow startup. That's kind of that invitation of like, hey, I really want to talk about what you think about this candidate. Are you open to it, right? Asking someone is a nice way to have a slow startup. Or is now an okay time to talk about, I don't know, the election or whatever it is, right? You know, asking people. And if they say no, okay, great. Well, I'd really like to talk about that with you sometime. Maybe we could set a time, right? And having it be more of an intentional conversation. And then also the last one is set a tone for you how you want the conversation to go, right? So you're finally sitting down having the conversation and saying, you know what, I really want to like care about each other. I want to see your dignity. I want to be seen and heard, and I want you to be seen and heard. And so, you know, we found with setting these ground rules to really bring the anxiety way down. If we've got a bare minimum for how we're going to show up in the room with each other and respectfully, and kind of honoring the perspective that's brought forth, that anxiety is going to go way down, and it creates structure. And as one of my, someone that I work with, that I used to work with, used to say there is freedom in structure. And so whenever there is structure, like in these rules, there's structure in that. And then there can be lots of freedom in the ways the conversation can go. That if there weren't these rules in place, the conversation would have never gone that way because there wasn't the safety and the rules in place. And yeah, do you want to talk about how to present these too?
You know, I think we give these to you as an idea that if you are thinking that if you wanted to have ground rules for your family gathering, this is a really nice set of ground rules. So how would you bring this to your family? So one way to do this is you can do it through the form of a declaration. Hey, you guys, we're coming together for Thanksgiving. I want you to know that these are some ground rules that I'm going to follow and commit to following. Okay? And here's what they are. And I'm curious if you'd be open to following the same ground rules. It's a way of saying, here's how I'm going to show up, and I'm inviting you to step into it with me to see if you'd be okay doing that. Because if you and I can reach an agreement on this, we got something to stand on. It makes it easier for us to be in this together. So remember, you can make declarations, and you can also invite people in. And it's helpful, right? These are pretty reasonable ground rules. If people follow these, there's a lot we could do and have in the dialogue. So I encourage you to think about that as a set of ground rules. This is one of the most important pieces for families to come together, is if we don't feel safe in the environment that we're in, then we're not going to engage in the conversation, or it will easily escalate and create more stress and problems. Okay? So safety is perhaps the first thing that we want to make sure we have in place.
I'll also say sometimes when we change up how we're showing up, right? If we're like, I'm making a declaration of this is how I'm going to show up with these ground rules, people may be like, well, that's kind of weird. Like they're experiencing you differently. And sometimes I think naming, like, you might be experiencing me differently. And this is why. Yeah. Because I really want our interactions to shift. And I'm really committed to showing up differently. So if you notice me kind of slipping into ways I used to show up, let me know. Because I really want things to go differently with us. Yeah, just naming that.
And you could go further. You could say, hey, historically, you guys, I've been the peacekeeper when we come together as a family. If you notice me try to help kind of calm the waters, I want you to know I don't think that's going to work anymore. I want to do something different. I think we're missing out on ways to listen and hear from each other about our views and perspectives on things. And I think that's an important message, if you want, you can send to people, that you're looking to do something different this time.
Mm-hmm. And these are just some ideas we thought of, like, some conversation starters. So, one of them is, how's your family doing about the political climate? Just checking in with, like, your sister or your brother of, like, hey, how's your family doing? What are you seeing? That's a slow startup in a way, really just kind of testing the waters. Or, I see anxiousness happening with my kids, kind of talking about your experience. And what I'm finding is if we can show our kids how adults can discuss these things, it could be great role modeling for our kids. And that's why I'm really committed to showing up with these ground rules in a different way. I really want to model this differently for my kids. Even asking your kids, how are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing at school about politics? Have your peers been talking about it at all? And also talking with your partner. And then also, mentioning how are you helping your kids navigate this, because they're picking up on it. I think last time someone mentioned that they had some really young kids that didn't really know much about politics, and they were watching Home Alone 2 or something like that, and Donald Trump is in the movie. I think that was you. And Donald Trump's in the movie, and the kiddo was like, oh, they knew who Donald Trump was. And so kids are really picking up on it. And so asking kids what they're seeing, even grandkids, right? We can start to wade into those conversations.
The other conversation piece that you can use is you can leverage this workshop that you're in right here tonight. You can say, I went to this thing at church, and it made me think about how we are when we come together, and I'd like to see if we could try something different. Or, hey, I looked at this Braver Angels site. Have you guys ever seen this before? They had some really interesting things. Would you ever like to take a look at that or learn more about it? again, I'm trying to invite people in to learn more about ways that we sometimes don't operate very well. And so it can be a nice way to find a common ground, because if every family member were to watch even the slideshow or to get a few little nuggets, I think most people would say, I get it. I don't want to be in a place as a family where we are tearing each other apart or creating divide. And I don't want to have anxiousness when we come together. I'd like us to find a way to enjoy each other's company, to be able to honor each other's views, to know we're going to have differences, but in the core, we can be here for each other. Now, it's easier said than done, folks. And big family. I've seen lots of conflict and helped lots of families with different conflicts. So it's a good challenge, and it's a good vision, I think. If you need to back it up with the scriptural piece, it is there, right?
And this is a tool from Braver Angels. They call it CAP. But the C stands for clarify, agree, pivot, and perspective. And so, clarify is really just, when you're wading into these conversations, just clarifying what you hear from the other person. I think your main point is blank, or are you saying this? I get that you're really bothered by, and being able to calmly clarify your position and viewpoint if it's different from someone else's. Oh, I'm not really saying that. This is actually, let me clarify. This is what I meant to say. And being able to reframe. Sometimes I think there's just miscommunication or interpretation that happens. And so finding ways to clarify and making sure that you're hearing the other person. A is agree. Try to find something or anything, literally anything that you can agree on with someone else. It builds common ground and it builds connection. If you can find something that you agree with. Maybe all you agree with is that you agree it's a mess, right? And you can say, I'm with you on this. And just finding any little thing that you can, because that brings the humanity back and it brings the connection back. And then pivot, this is for letting them know you're going to share another perspective. Can I give you my thoughts on this issue? Or I've had some experience with this in my life, and I'd like to share where I'm coming from. If someone's unwilling to listen, you can ask more directly, like, hey, can I share? Can you listen to me? I really want to share this with you. You also can go back to clarify, because maybe they're still feeling unheard. Is you can clarify to see if, like, okay, am I getting this? I really want to get this. And then agree, and then kind of see if you're able to pivot, and they may be more open to it. And then perspective, giving your view using an I statement. Avoid universal truths of, like, this is the way it is, or the fact is this. And avoid labeling the other person's perspective. Just stick to your perspective. Really just taking a very this is my perspective, this is what I think, this is what I've read about, this is my experience. And then also share a personal story connected to your viewpoint. This can really humanize it. It can humanize the issue. It can bring your humanity back to the table, because I think oftentimes when we get into these conversations that are really heated, humanity kind of gets taken away. And it's when we're able to bring that back to the table, it offers up opportunity for connection once again. And then exiting the conversation and looking for the right time to leave the conversation. And especially as you're trying out some of these new skills, it's okay to keep these pretty brief, right? You can kind of exit when it's like, you know what, I feel like we talked about that enough. If we go any deeper, I could see myself like having trouble managing this. So, knowing it's okay to, pause early, or just keeping the conversations short too.
These are really fun. If you use these, they work. I remember, this was last spring as an example, I was at the final kind of orchestra banquet for my kids. So I have two boys. One of them was graduated now, is in college, but one is in orchestra, plays bass. And so they have the end of the year kind of banquet, right? And so all the parents were there talking, and I have to tell you, this worked really well. I was able to meet somebody for the first time was able to use these skills right here to be able to share different thoughts about what we saw going on. And the part that was easiest is if you think about the introductory questions about how is your kids doing with this political scene? Because I see some anxiety in mine. What are you seeing? We already started with common ground, and it opened the door to be able to see differences of perspective politically, and it was okay, because the bottom line is we care. We already aligned. We care about our kids, and we want to make sure that they're going to be okay. So these things can work, and there are times that they don't, but that's something I think, is that next year?
Yeah, so last time we talked about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and that's by Gottman. He's a kind of couples therapist. And so there are these four pieces that often show up in marriage relationships, but also in families: the criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And they talk about they have antidotes, right? These are ways to kind of neutralize these horsemen that show up. So for criticism, it is that gentle startup, talking about your feelings or opinions using I statements, as we've already talked about, or contempt, building a culture of appreciation and reminding yourself of the value that others hold and finding gratitude. And then defensiveness, the antidote to that is taking responsibility, accepting ownership to how you've showed up, and offering an apology if there is a need for it, right? Maybe you made a sniper comment and you got to offer an apology for it. And then stonewalling, that's taking a break, knowing when to care for yourself. When you're completely shut down and stonewalling is also, it's like shut down, not engaging at all. And so knowing I really need to care for myself. I need to take some deep breaths. This isn't time for me to have this conversation. I'm going to have to come back to it later.
So how do we prevent getting trapped? Okay, because I can tell you I've been trapped a number of times in my own family system, and I've worked with lots of families that have been trapped as well in really stuck places. Okay, so the first part is proactive. If you know what's going to happen or how you are stuck, it can start with intention. It can be an invitation of saying, I'm aware that we are not doing well when we come together to talk about this, and I'd like to sit down with you to see if we could come together and find a different way of doing this. Now, this can be a blanket invitation to everybody. Sometimes that's too much or it doesn't work. So often you find that if you're trying to gather a larger group of people, more than 2 or 3, sometimes you need to go direct to the people and individually ask them, hey, I'm aware of this happened the last time we were together. It didn't feel very good. I'm wanting to know, would you have an interest in trying to find a different way of doing this when we get together as a family? And so in a sense, you're trying to reach out to each person to see if there is any sort of momentum. And it may be that you only have one that wants to do it, so then start there. So that if you're going to meet with just one of the family members, that's a starting point to say, hey, I want to make sure you and I are okay. Here's how I'm going to show up. Here's some things I'm seeing. Here's how I want to respond differently. Okay, so proactive steps can be good. At my church, and I lived down in Bloomington, and I remember at St. Michael's, and it was just touching to hear a story of one of the members. My pastor shared this with me, and he said, it was beautiful. This was a older woman who probably wasn't going to be on this earth much longer. And she sent a note to each of her kids that said, I think this might be my last Thanksgiving. This was a year ago. And I'm worried about how sometimes things can go away in an unhealthy way. And I want to be able to have this last Thanksgiving as something where we can come together and share each other's views and still show love for each other. And I was just so touched. It's like, what a beautiful call to say, hey, before I go, could we do this? Could I have a legacy or give this gift? And it sounds like it worked. Okay? So that just made my heart go, okay, there's hope, right? We can do things and we can try things. And it can be hard and difficult. Be aware of your own defensive responses. if we have a history of relationships that are not easy or difficult, we can have an automatic defensiveness. That I know this is how this might go, and so we can already come in already guarded. And so again, we have to be aware of that that's showing up. We still get to protect ourselves, but if my defensiveness is easily triggered, I may be missing opportunities to connect with people that it would be valuable to have connections with. So what do you do if it doesn't work? Okay. So I've worked with families that have had some pretty hard and difficult conflicts. There were a number of families I worked with during COVID, and I had some really hard kind of generational divides. I had older generation that did not get vaccinated, were not going to get vaxxed, did not want masks, chose not to have masks. And you had the younger generation that had grandkids of saying this is a safety issue, and I can't allow you to have access to the grandkids because it's unsafe. Okay, so that's where it started, and they couldn't work their way through it, okay, without some help. Now, what I will tell you is when we're trying to solve a problem, and it seems really simple, why can't we figure this out? This seems really simple to negotiate something. It is more likely that there is a second or third issue that's entwined with the major issue that's in play, okay? And those are often where it gets more difficult, because it's not only one issue, it's not about COVID, there's something happened 5 years ago when so-and-so said this or did that, and it's never been talked about or resolved. And so this issue that's happening today is bringing up the laundry from the past that's never been addressed or dealt with. So this happens a lot in families, so if we're stuck on something, it's likely there may be something else that didn't get talked about. And maybe you don't have to talk about it. If we're just coming together on the 4th of July or Thanksgiving, we're gonna be there for a couple hours, sometimes we can kind of roll with it and let it play. And there are times too where it is important to be able to say, I'm aware that we're having this struggle, but I think there may be these other struggles as well. And we can invite people to want to talk about it, or it can be, I'm aware of this sibling and that sibling that had something happen 5 years ago and they've never dealt with it, and now it's leaking out into the family gathering. In those situations, family members do get the challenge to say, you guys, I need you guys to either get this worked out or you need to agree that you're not going to bring it up here because it's affecting everybody else. Not always easy to do. Families can call us to do courageous things. There can be, I don't know about you, but my family tree has got substance abuse history. It goes back 4 or 5 generations. I have celiac. This is a kind of a side story. I think celiac prevented me from having a substance use disorder because I would get so darn sick when I was drinking in high school. I thought, who would have thought? Celiac was a saving grace for me. So untreated or unaddressed substance abuse or major mental health or mental illnesses can be a significant factor that can make it difficult to engage in conversations. So sometimes there needs to be a strategy about how you want to manage that or address that, because it will show up as a political issue when in fact there are these other things that may also be in play. And so then what do you do? Okay, so go back to the ground rules. Can we create a safe place to have conversations with each other? That's always got to be the first place. And if I can't create a safe place to talk about it, then there needs to be a discussion. What do we need to do to create that so when we are together, we can have a good time or an okay experience with each other? We can talk more about that if you have more specific questions about it, but that is not an easy thing to do, to manage, but it's important to talk about and to address. Be aware that you may be contributing to the conflict. There was a role that I played growing up that I tried to keep playing on as I became an adult, and it didn't work very well. It created more conflict. And so I had to be aware that I grew up as the second oldest to play a certain role in my family that wasn't always helpful when we got together. It created resentment and anger in some of my siblings, And so the feedback was, are you aware that you're showing up this way? No, I was not. And I had to do some stepping back to say, you guys are right. Mea culpa. I had to be humble before them and say, you are right. I apologize. And this is my work to come together to step away from that role. You guys, some of this stuff can be some of the most painful things when we have family members that we're not in connection the way we'd like to be. There can be an immense loss that families experience and often doesn't get talked about. So again, we just invite you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because if families are suffering or struggling with something, it's a loss. I can't have the relationship time with everybody I'd like to have. It's okay to bring that up in ways as perhaps a way to invite people to say, hey, I know we sometimes get stuck when we're together. Could we try to do some things different this year? You can do fun things as well. If political divide is there for your family, have you ever heard of walk a mile in somebody else's shoes? Have you ever heard of walk a mile in somebody else's news? Okay, so if you want to learn how somebody else is interpreting the world through a media lens, find out what media they're watching, watch it for a few days, have them watch your media, and see what you learn and discover. It can be kind of a fun activity to do for families if they are open to it. Make sure that as you're going forward, remember your heart attitude at the front end. We talked about those values. That's always helpful to go back to those values in Scripture and be clear on the why. Why do you want to do this? Why are you bringing this up? You're doing it, I think, as a way of challenging us. So if we're coming together as a family, there's opportunities to learn and grow from each other's view and perspectives. That if we take that curiosity view and the value that everybody at the table can contribute by sharing their perspective, and if we can create an environment where that can happen, we're going to role model for our kids to see that this can be life-giving, and we can learn a great deal from each other that can grow ourselves in how we understand some of these complex issues that do not have easy solutions. Don't forget prayer. And I know you may have the Thanksgiving prayer that maybe for many families do. It's okay to put this in, that I pray for our family, that we learn how to hear and listen to each other in ways that we can grow in our connection to each other, and that we become wiser as a group, okay? So I believe in the power of prayer. I think it's amazing. Remember, safety, if you don't have safety, you can't move forward with discussion, okay? And it can be you've got a large group and you've got most of the people that are comfortable, but there's a couple that are not. It's okay to say, you know, I want to make sure everybody's okay, or pull them aside and say, are you okay being in this conversation? I notice you're stepping away. What are you needing? What do we need to do to make it safe for everybody? That's important. Remember, the unresolved historical stuff can be very powerful in the present. So if it's not resolved, it's likely there's these other issues historically that have happened that sometimes aren't easy to bring up or talk about, but might be what's in the way. So it's okay sometimes to bring it up. Hey, I'm wondering if this stuff that happened 4 years ago, if maybe we're not done dealing with it. And if we need to talk about it, can we find a way to do it so that we can either create forgiveness or a way to move forward that it's not affecting how we are with each other? Grudges can last a long time for some people, okay? And resentments, what do they say? Resentment is drinking poison for yourself and thinking somebody else is going to be harmed by it or be injured from it. It's like we're poisoning ourselves, okay? So go back to this. Yeah, no, go to the next one. You got it. So we're kind of wrapping up here. We hope you've got some ideas about what you could do potentially if we thought about Thanksgiving. It's a couple months away. What could you do now to try to introduce thoughts and ideas that could make Thanksgiving a pretty cool holiday for your family. Again, nothing's perfect, but if it starts with intention, trying to bring up ideas of ways we could come together and manage sometimes hard things, but also can we create an environment that could be really enjoyable for everybody, and an opportunity for us to deepen our connections with each other. If I go back to the beginning, remember, families are the most important fabric of our society. And if we can take steps to share why we're doing this, this is about us coming together. This is the most important thing that we have, is the relationships with each other. And if we can work on building that with each other, I think it's a worthy endeavor.
Yeah, and I'll add too, as we were talking about coming here today, Michael and I were talking, we were kind of discussing, what does it look like for us to like cast vision for our families of like, this is where I want to go. These are the values I want in place. These are what I want the conversations to look like. And so we just invite you guys to cast vision for your families. Of what do you want these conversations to look like? And so thanks for being with us today. Oh, do we have one?
We do.
We got one more.
Remember, God has told us to press towards peace. It's a hard call, important one, but it is helpful. Colossians, put on then as God's chosen one, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgive each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called in one body, and be thankful. So, families are amazing. They are just amazing things. The things we've gone through and experienced and hopefully become stronger. We hope we've been helpful to you to generate some ideas. Curious if anybody would have any feedback or thoughts of takeaways that you've had from today's meeting. If there's one thing that stands out for you, just as we kind of wrap up, it'd be good to hear from a few people. Just what's one thing that was beneficial or helpful for you?
I would think the word intentionality loud and clear.
Intentionality.
Yeah.
We're all kind of on the same wavelength, and so we end up over-affirming each other. And it gets a little carried away sometimes. Not conflict, but too much, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, have you heard about this?
Yeah, we get kind of stuck in silos of we're with the same
Yes.
group of people, and so we're hearing like everyone I know agrees with me, right? We're kind of like in this little bubble.
It's not very constructive.
Yeah.
Yeah, the walking in somebody else's news. Yeah, yeah. Any other closing thoughts from anybody? Well, a pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you for bringing us in here.
Yeah,
Glad to
thank
help
you.
out. Have a beautiful fall, and I hope you all have wonderful Thanksgivings with your families.